Okay, hi everyone. Today is September 23rd, 2020. I am Ishan, CTO at Moovweb. With me today is Ankur, our platform product manager, and Yvonne, our director of engineering in the platform team. And Ankur is going to walk us through the product updates on the Moovweb XDN over the past 2 weeks. Ankur, take it away.
Thanks, Ishan. All right, so we have a few things for you today. First of all, the XDN package version number has been updated. Last time we met, it was version 2.6.1. We are at 2.13.0. We don't have any breaking changes, so that's good news. We are just adding new functionalities here, which we'll talk about today. Right. First of all, Sapper is now supported as part of XDN. If you go to developer.moovweb.com, you should see a section for Sapper documentation there. All the steps that you see will be similar to Nuxt.js or React or other frameworks that we have supported in the past. So that's there.
One thing I want to add for folks who aren't aware, so Sapper is the equivalent of what, Nuxt.js is or Next.js is to Vue and React, but for the emerging framework Svelte, which is getting a lot of interest and traction. So think of this as Svelte support and its equivalent, server-side render framework, which is Sapper.
Perfect. Next, as you might have seen in this screenshot already, we have Gatsby support now. So that's another framework we have added support for as part of XDN. Again, the documentation is there on developer.moovweb.com. You can just follow the steps to integrate XDN into your Gatsby project. Now, on to certain exciting features. We have added something called query parameter matching. Now, in routes.js, you have certain conditions you can specify to match the routes, essentially the URL paths. Previously, you could use options to match URL paths or methods or cookies. Now we have an additional option for query. The benefit of that is that if you have a specific functionality you want to implement based on query parameters, you could do that without relying on the path itself. So you don't have to duplicate your code for every path with the same query parameter. So instead of writing 10 functions, you can just use match based on query parameters and implement that then and there. So that's the benefit now. As you see in the code snippet below, the router match used to have path, methods, cookies. Now there is a section for query as well, and you can define the query parameter and the values using regex to match certain routes. So, moving on, this will be a sample routes.js snippet. So if you see here in the match function, we are trying to match based on path/sale, and the query parameter we have chosen is product ID, and the value can be anything that's represented by the .regex over there. If you look down on the get function, if a product ID is missing, then it will redirect it back to the home page. So that is something you could add, that if product ID is missing, redirect the user back to the home page. Otherwise, you can have different functions being called based on the query parameter that's resulted there. That's just a simple example of how powerful this tool is, and you can use it in ways that you see fit. We also have now prefetching for Apollo for GraphQL. What we have done is that rather than use the payload as a cache key, we have created a SHA-256 hash of the payload, which in conjunction with the URL is now used as the cache key. What this allows us to do is use a get call instead of a post to do prefetching. The benefits of using that is that if you make a prefetch using post call, service worker prioritizes that page above the current page requests that are already happening. which results in slower page loads. So using get call, we could postpone the prefetching after the page is already loaded, which results in faster page loads in a nutshell. The documentation for this is again available on developer.moovweb.com. If we quickly go there, you can see all the steps that have been listed out here. So you'll have to install XDN Apollo if you don't have that already. The code is for there. And then you'll have to update the XDN config.js to include the GraphQL backend, which has been done over here. If you see, has been listed. And then you need to define the proxy path for that backend, which if you see has been mentioned over here on the bottom. You have comments to guide you what exactly is happening with each code snippet as well. And then once you have the proxy defined, you can create a logic saying that, okay, if if the Windows is undefined, you can direct the user to the pre-configured GraphQL endpoint in the environment variables, or you can direct them to the proxy path that you defined just now in the XDN config.js. That's how it's supposed to work. More details are here in the documentation. If you go through, you can test this on your local machine as well, obviously, using XDN run with the cache parameter in there. One point to note is that Apollo does have basic prefetching functionality as part of that package as well, but the prefetching functionality that we have here goes way beyond that and improves the page performance on top of what Apollo gives you. So that's an additional benefits over there as well.
So I just want to set some context for those who aren't familiar with Apollo and GraphQL. So GraphQL, as I'm sure most folks are aware, is the alternative to REST as an API format, and Apollo is a popular client-side library for using GraphQL in your front-end code. What we have basically done is added a middleware to Apollo that does all these changes, those steps that Ankur showed earlier, integrate into your code so that you can support, XDN's prefetching in a way that works with Apollo and GraphQL.
Great point. Thanks, Ishan. Okay. Now, we have another functionality for you, especially to deal with slow backends or slow upstreams. What we now allow users to do is disable cache for specific get routes so that it tells XDN that don't coalesce these requests, so that we are not waiting to figure out that the caching is not allowed on these routes, and then we can improve the response times for these specific requests. So as you have an example here, if you want to disable cache for everything upstream, that's an option you can use. If you don't want to use that for obvious reasons, then you can specify a path that you don't want to cache, and then add that to the router.js, which will tell XDN not to cache certain GET requests. Okay. We now also have a new API for you to track timings. This allows you to identify how much time your code in the application is taking to run. The package is now available as part of XDN core/timing. And then if you choose to add that to the API or your application, the data will be returned as part of XDN user T response headers in the calls that you make. The code snippet that you see there is how you would use it. You need to import timing from the package and then associate that up to when your API function is being started and finished, and then you should get that result in the response headers.
So a couple things I want to just add here. First, to clarify, this is for tracking the amount of time your code is taking in the serverless tier, not necessarily for client-side code. And that's why it's being reported in this response header. So the second thing to be aware of is that, as is indicated here. This data is in this XDN user T response header. That response header is documented in our developer documentation. If you want to go look at a request from the past, the XDN user T results are in the server log that we make available to folks on the enterprise tier. And then coming down the road, we'll actually be collecting and aggregating these statistics around the user timing results for you in control panels within the console. In the meantime, though, you can grab these out of your logs. You can then basically dump it into whatever your enterprise logging solution is and analyze it that way.
Good point. Thanks, Ishan. I also have a final point on XDN CLI. We now require at least a node version 12 or newer for you to be able to run XDN CLI. That's just a minor point. I'm sure everyone is using node 14 at this point. Right. There have been some minor updates in XDN documentation as well. I want to walk you through those. We now have a new security guide. We all know protecting our sites is very important. So you can walk through how CSPs and other cross-site scriptings and data injection attacks can be prevented on Moovweb XDN sites. The guide is there now on developer.moovweb.com. We also provide some sample codes on how you can implement those, as you can see in the snippet there. So it should be easy to use and incorporate into your existing site. We also added some new cookbooks. This is specifically around bundling your server using Webpack, what Webpack config should look like, how you should configure that, and then use that to bundle your deployment onto an XDN. Minor updates to the XDN Developer Console. That's the moovweb.app site settings that you go to. We have added functionality to record build errors as they're happening on your local system as well. So we all know you're trying to build something, you're trying to deploy to XDN, you run into an error that is visible on your terminal. It was not being recorded onto the console before. We have now added that functionality that you can see those errors being reflected onto the Moovweb console as well. Right. So a quick show of how that is supposed to look like. So I did a deployment on my local private machine, and then I ran into an error, and that is now being shown into the Moovweb console as well. So you can go here. The benefit of this is that you can share this with someone else. We also now have forums functionality here. So copying data from here onto forums, if you want to ask any questions, would be really easy to do.
Yeah, and just to clarify, we've always there's kind of two phases, broadly speaking, of the deployment process. The first is what we call the client build. That's where it's building either on your local machine or in your CI environment, and it's doing the build step of whatever your underlying framework is, whether it's Nuxt or Nuxt or something like that. And then there's the preparation of that to get deployed onto the XDN. And that second phase, we've always been recording those errors and reporting them. But now we're actually reporting and capturing the errors that aren't, in some sense, part of our responsibility, but we're capturing them so that you can triage and record them and share them with others as well. So that's what we're adding here.
We also made a couple more changes there. Now, in the free tier of Moovweb XDN, you will have the facility to upload SSL certificates. This was always available as part of the enterprise plan. Now it's also available as part of free tier. All you have to do is go to the settings, and that option should be available over here for your site. A couple of other minor changes. We also added wildcard domain functionality to define all your subdomains in a reverse proxy. It was always supported for SSL proxy scenarios, but we have now supported it for your reverse proxy scenario as well. And also there is a limit on subdomain names for pre-prod environments only. We were running into an issue with long domain names. So we now have limited the subdomain name length to 63 characters. It's still 63, so should be enough. But that's a limit only on pre-prod environments though. So that's something to note when you're working.
Yeah, so just to clarify that, it's the limit there is for the subdomain of a domain. In total, there is the total length of domain can be up to 250 characters, and this is per DNS standard. What we do now is we automatically change the domain if it's too long. If the subdomain, if the composite subdomain that we give automatically to your site is too long, meaning that the subdomain is longer than 63 characters, then we do a partial hash of the domain, and then truncate the name and just add that. So that leads that way we avoid this limit of 63 characters by keeping it always under.
Thanks, Ivan, for that addition.
Sure.
And that's all we have for you today. We can open it up for questions.
Yeah, so just a reminder, you can add questions in the chat window. And one thing I do want to call out is that we're going to be changing up the format for these updates moving forward. We're going to try experimenting with a few different formats and how we'll do these. So look for those changes in the coming weeks, and we'll be iterating around that for a while. It actually looks like we don't have any questions for today's session. So, and we're close to time. So at that then, I'll just close out today's session and thank everyone for coming.
Thank you.